Picture a Johnston County farm in the summer of 1893. Cotton is waist high, looking good. Been looking good for decades, actually. Ever since 100 years earlier, when Eli Whitney's cotton gin showed up in the county around 1804 and transformed what had been a patchwork of subsistence farms into something resembling a real cash economy. Cotton built this county. As with most in the American South, cotton paid for the houses, the church pews, and the mule teams, and cotton was the whole ball game. That's why they called it King Cotton. And then, in the summer of 1893, the stock market completely collapsed. No, not the Great Depression. The Great Depression wasn't the first Great Depression. This probably was. Banks failed. Railroads went bankrupt. The whole American economy seized up like an engine with no oil. Historians call it the Panic of 1893, the worst economic depression the United States had seen up to that point. And out on the Johnston County farms, farmers watched cotton prices fall off a cliff. By the time the dust settled, cotton was fetching somewhere between 6 and 8 cents a pound. That's not a living. That's not even close to a living. That's a slow motion disaster playing out one harvest at a time. Johnston County needed a new crop, fast, and it found one. In a story that starts with a sleeping blacksmith, travels through a Civil War battlefield, and ends on a Smithfield auction floor in 1898 with a brand new county sitting on the edge of a brand new future. To understand why bright leaf tobacco saved Johnston County, you have to understand where it came from. The answer, like most great stories, involves a man falling asleep on the job. 1839, Caswell County, up near the Virginia border. A man named Stephen, enslaved on the farm of a planter named Bishop Slade, is working the overnight shift in the tobacco curing barn. The job was simple: keep the fire at exactly the right temperature at night, drawing moisture slowly from the hanging leaf. Fall asleep, let the fire die, and you ruined everything. Well, Stephen fell asleep. He woke to a dying fire, sprinted to the nearby blacksmith pit, grabbed a load of hot charcoal, and dumped it on the flames. The charcoal sent a sudden, intense blast of heat through the barn, far beyond what a wood fire could manage, and Stephen braced for the worst. What he got instead was tobacco cured to a vivid, brilliant yellow, golden, a bright leaf, if you will, mild and sweet on the palate. Smokers loved it. The story of exactly how it happened has been debated by historians for 150 years. It first appeared in print nearly 50 years after the event, but what nobody disputes is that Bishop Slade and his family refined the flue curing process, spread it to neighboring farms, and by the 1850s, the Piedmont was producing bright leaf that commanded the highest prices on the market. Then Sherman's army became, accidentally, its sales force. When Union and Confederate troops idled at Bennett Place near Durham in April 1865, waiting for surrender terms, they raided local tobacco warehouses and discovered North Carolina's golden leaf. After the war, letters poured in from soldiers across the country, begging for more, and word-of-mouth marketing 19th century style. Bright leaf had gone national. Now, through the 1870s and 1880s, the tobacco boom was mostly a Piedmont story: Durham, Wilson, Warren County. Those were tobacco towns. Johnston County, sitting in the eastern coastal plain, was still cotton country, and not particularly worried about it. And then 1893 arrived. By the early 1890s, eastern North Carolina farmers had already been watching their Piedmont neighbors make good money on tobacco and wondering if it might work on their side of the state. The soil was different, but that turned out not to be a problem. In fact, the leaner, sandier soil of the coastal plain produced a particularly fine bright leaf. Some Johnston County farmers had started experimenting quietly, and when cotton prices collapsed, that quiet experimentation that no one was really talking about, well, those guys made it turn into a full-scale pivot. Cotton had been king for 90 years. Farmers knew its rhythms, its demands, its markets. Tobacco was a different animal entirely. You had to build curing barns, small log structures with flues, running along the floor to carry heat evenly through the hanging leaves. You had to learn to read the color of the leaf as it cured, pulling it at just the right moment. You had to understand a completely different auction system where buyers who spoke in a fast chant and made snap decisions in seconds. The whole operation was completely unfamiliar, technically demanding, and if you got it wrong, financially ruinous. Johnston County farmers learned it anyway, because the alternative was watching cotton eat them alive at 6 cents a pound. By the mid-1890s, tobacco acreage in eastern North Carolina was expanding rapidly. The wave that had started in Warren and Nash counties rolled through Wilson and Pitt, and it reached Johnston County with enough force to demand something the county had never had before: a market. In 1898, two things happened in Smithfield that changed our county forever. The first was the opening of the Smithfield Tobacco Market. The second was the establishment of Johnston County's very first bank. And those two facts are not a coincidence. The Banner Warehouse was among the first structures built for the new market, a long, cavernous building on the edge of town where farmers could bring their cured leaf, lay it out in baskets on the floor, and let the buyers come to them. The tobacco auction was a particular kind of commerce, loud, fast, almost theater. A line of buyers from the big cigarette companies moved through the warehouse behind the auctioneer, who called the bids in a rhythmic, barely intelligible chant, while buyers flicked their fingers or nodded to signal their interest. Got to be careful with that one, man. You nod at the wrong time, you got yourself a lot of tobacco. The whole process took seconds per basket. A season's worth of labor, priced and sold, and the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. For farmers who had spent their whole lives hauling cotton to a gin and waiting weeks for a price, the tobacco auction was disorienting. But the prices, when they were good, was something cotton had never delivered. This golden leaf paid it like gold. And the bank, well, the Bank of Smithfield, organized that very same year, was Johnston County's first actual real bank, believe that or not. Not a coincidence at all. Tobacco was a cash crop in a way cotton had never managed to be here, and cash crops need banks. The two institutions, the warehouse and the bank, arrived together because they needed each other. You don't build a tobacco economy without somewhere to store and sell the leaf, and you don't build it without somewhere to bank the proceeds and borrow against next year's crop. It was, in the truest sense, an infrastructure of optimism. Johnston County was betting on itself. That transformation was rapid, it was real. Within a few years of the market opening, cotton mills went up in Smithfield, Clayton, and Selma. Telephone lines reached nearly every town, and by 1913, both Smithfield and Selma had electric lights and running water. Thank you, tobacco. The stately brick houses that still line the older streets of Smithfield today, many built between 1910 and 1920, they're the physical record of what happened when tobacco money started flowing through Smithfield and Johnston County as a whole. Now, cotton didn't vanish overnight. By 1924, the county still had more than 85,000 acres in cotton versus just 10,000 in tobacco. But the writing was on the wall. The Great Depression finished cotton for good, and tobacco filled the void so completely that by mid-century, auction warehouses dominated downtown Smithfield the way cotton gins once had. The market eventually grew into one of the largest tobacco markets in the world, its warehouses ultimately migrating to a stretch of highways south of town that Smithfield would later rename, with appropriate pride, Brightleaf Boulevard. That's why it's called that. And that first bank, the Bank of Smithfield, 1898, grew and merged and changed names for over a century until it finally became First Citizens Bank, today one of the largest family-controlled banks in the United States. A straight line from a tobacco warehouse on the edge of a small Carolina town to a major American financial institution. Not bad for a county that 5 years earlier had been watching its cotton economy bleed out at 6 cents a pound. Now, there's a version of this story that's purely about economics, crop prices, and market forces and agricultural transition, and that version is true as far as it goes. But the version I keep thinking about is the one on the farm. The Johnston County farmer in 1894 who'd never grown a single lick of tobacco in his life, standing in a field that had produced cotton for 3 generations, deciding to build a curing farm he didn't know how to operate for a crop he'd never raised, to sell at an auction he'd never attended in a market that didn't even exist in this county. Man, that's not an economic calculation. That's a leap of faith come out of sheer desperation. The panic of 1893 gave Johnston County no good options. The cotton was dying. Something had to replace it. And farmers here, the ones who built the curing barns and learned the auction chant and drove their wagons into Smithfield in 1898, man, they were newbies at this. They had no idea what they were doing. But they made a decision that echoes through everything that came after. The brick buildings on the square, the bank that became First Citizens, the 85,000 acres of golden leaf waving in summer heat, the road south of town they named Brightleaf Boulevard, all of it traces back to one bad year of cotton. A desperate pivot and a warehouse on the edge of a small Carolina town where farmers bet their futures on a single leaf. And won. And y'all, that's Joko Yo today. Y'all be good.